I'm sorry, that I misunderstood.
Doing that is to communicate this message precisely to a certain group of people, and their job, as this young man says, is to be a light to the Gentiles, a light to the nations, to pass it on to the others. Whether that ever happened or not, or whether that has in fact happened, is an interesting and difficult question. Is there any injustice involved in doing that? Yeah, I'm willing to admit that it might have been better for the Amalekites if God had chosen the Amalekites instead of the Israelites. And in fact, the Israelites themselves in Deuteronomy, we see that they're quite unable to account for the fact that why God chose them. I mean, the best they can come up with is kind of a tautology that said God loved us because He loved us. I mean, that's the best they can do. So they kind of wrestled with Him as well. As to so I think that doesn't completely take away all the injustice. I agree that there's a little bit of that there, and it certainly has been interpreted and acted upon in ways that all of us here in this room would strike as being completely unjust and unethical. But I don't think that was God's aim. Last point on the supersession thing. I myself think that it's probably impossible to be a Christian without, in some sense, thinking that the church has superseded Israel. In some sense, I think you've probably got to say that. Okay, but I just want to be clear that Paul thinks, and Christians therefore should hold, that Christians are a kind of branch that were grafted on to Israel, that Israel has a continuing role to play in the redemptive purposes of God, and that it is not true that the Jews are no longer God's chosen people. We Christians believe that we are part of the chosen people too.
I had trouble with the first thing you said. Suppose that God wanted to communicate a message to all peoples. You know, He could have written it down in a language that everybody understood, or he could have created people all speaking the same language so that He could have made one announcement for everybody. I mean, you're sort of inviting me to consider all the things that He might have done that would have been entailed far less injustice than the course He chose. I'm not sure, somebody's going to say, what makes me think that I know that that's a better way or more probable than any other way? And when I'm confronted with that kind of skeptical challenge, I don't know what to say. But I don't see how his having that aim entailed that it was okay for him to do something that entailed so much suffering that had nothing to do with moral desert. And I might say this, I think that if it's true that the only way he could communicate this message is by taking this course that entailed all of these injustices and all this suffering, maybe he didn't have the right to convey that message. Professor Crisp.
My question's for Professor Antony. I want to better understand your...
It's about me.
I want to better understand your objection to hyperbolic hagiography. So I recently read a collection of stories about St. Francis, which I think are paradigmatic examples of hyperbolic hagiography. Delightful stories. They're passed on, I think, in the understanding that, are these true? I'm not sure. Probably many of them aren't. But morally, many of them are morally powerful. And so my question is, what's the problem with these?
I thought a lot about this because I had experiences when I was in high school of discovering that figures that I had revered, had done some things that I didn't think figures like that could do. And I think as an atheist that a big challenge for human life is to deal with the messy realities of our condition and to realize that enormous courage and tremendous commitment and sympathy and charity can reside in the same breast as mean-spiritedness, even very serious moral failings, cruelty, and so forth. And that the sooner we get that into our heads, the better off we're all going to be. So I think that I have enormous respect for many of the things that Abraham Lincoln did, for many of the ways in which he managed the disaster that he confronted when he became president. At the same time, I just read a review in the New York Review of Books of a book by Henry Louis Gates making clear, I think, by quoting a lot of speeches of Lincoln, that he was pretty racist. He was pretty racist, and that he had not the kind of reasons for wanting to end slavery that I think we were allowed to believe he had when you read the conventional histories. And I think it's actually dangerous to sort of promulgate, I think what a hagiography that leaves some of that stuff, that leaves all of that stuff out, I think what it does is sort of encourage the idea that you're only admirable. You can only be admirable if you're perfect. And that's just not true. I think a challenge is to find a way that we can admire the admirable, the genuinely admirable, without having to pretend that the other stuff isn't there.
With apologies to everyone else in the queue, I think we'd better make the man in the red shirt, the professor in the red shirt, be our last questioner, and I'm sorry about everybody else stiffing you.
Thank you. I have a question for Professor Wolterstorff. It won't be one that, the tendency of my question will not be one that helps to resolve our problem with Joshua, but it's the question about the internal tension that you claim to find. And I'm sorry I haven't read your book. Maybe the answer is there. But yes, okay. In my experience, I don't see this internal tension that you see between some of these episodes and the places where God is praised for justice. On the contrary, usually the destruction of the wicked is an occasion of praise, particularly in the Old Testament, but not only there, as praise to God as a manifestation of his justice. So if we take justice as some sort of concept, and biblical justice as some sort of concept we're trying to discern, it seems to me that there isn't an internal tension there that's very significant. I mean, there's maybe an external problem for us, but I don't see that internal issue. Maybe you could comment on where you find that, please.
So the tension that I refer to towards the end of my paper is not exactly that, but rather the following. Suppose you read the book of Joshua through...
I had in mind the beginning of your paper, in case that wasn't clear.
Oh, so it's a tension between Joshua and Judges. So suppose you read the book of Joshua, the first 12 chapters, skip chapter 13, and skip all those chapters about the land allotments to the tribes, and read the last 2 chapters. Okay, now you've got that in mind. Now you take up the book of Judges. I think it's impossible not to feel dissonance here. This celebratory biography of Joshua, and then this down-to-earth stuff that you get in Judges, when some of the cities that are mentioned in Judges in the first chapter as not having been conquered are mentioned in the book of Joshua as having been conquered. There's a collision of, if nothing else, of literary styles here, but beyond that, of the story.
I was talking about between a tension between the concept of justice and...
So that concept is this. It seems to me that what Scripture in many passages celebrates justice and celebrates God as being just and gives us some indication of what that's like. God's care, and we should care for the widows, the orphans, the aliens, and the impoverished, over and over that quintet. Okay? Now, if we read these stories as literal, God commands that all the inhabitants of all the Canaanite cities be slaughtered, children as well as women and men. There is, to understate the matter, tension there.
Let me finish by thanking our symposiasts and all of you for